The small pothos plant on my desk meant nothing to anyone else. Just another office decoration gathering dust under fluorescent lights. But that insignificant green thing became the catalyst for the most calculated revenge I'd ever orchestrate. When my arrogant ex-boss mocked it during a board meeting, calling it cheap decor reflecting your worthless contributions, he unknowingly signed his own professional death warrant. He thought he was breaking me. Instead, he taught me that the quietest revenges are the deadliest. My name is Claire Matthews, and I'm 32 years old. Most people who meet me see exactly what I want them to see. A quiet tech engineer from small-town Ohio who somehow made it to Denver's competitive startup scene. They see the woman who arrives early, stays late, and keeps a small pothos plant on her desk like some cliché of office domesticity. What they don't see is the steel underneath. I grew up in Zanesville, Ohio, population 25,000 on a good day. My parents ran a hardware store on Main Street, the kind where people still ask for advice about which screws to use and actually listen to the answer. That's where I learned that patience and attention to detail matter more than flashy presentations. While other kids were playing video games, I was in the back room, teaching myself to code on an ancient desktop my dad salvaged from a customer who couldn't pay their bill. The pothos came with me from Ohio, a cutting from my grandmother's plant that had survived 40 years in her kitchen window. She gave it to me the day I left for Colorado, pressing the small pot into my hands with those weathered fingers that had seen the Depression, 2 wars, and the death of the American dream she'd believed in. "Keep something growing, Claire," she'd said. "It reminds you that progress takes time." At Nexacore Systems, I was employee number 12. Not early enough to be a founder, not late enough to be insignificant. I specialized in data processing algorithms, the unsexy back-end stuff that made our platform actually work while the sales team promised miracles to venture capitalists. My desk sat in the corner of our open-plan office, the pothos positioned where it caught the morning sun through the floor-to-ceiling windows that were supposed to make us feel innovative and transparent. I'm not the kind of woman who commands attention when she walks into a room. Average height, brown hair that I usually pulled back in a ponytail. Clothes from Target that fit well enough but would never grace an Instagram feed. In meetings, I spoke when I had something substantial to contribute, which meant the men often forgot I was there until they needed someone to actually solve a problem instead of just talking about solving it. But here's what they missed while they were dismissing me. I remember everything, every slight, every stolen idea. Every time someone repeated my suggestion louder and got the credit, I documented it all in neat, time-stamped notes that I'd review late at night in my one-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. The pothos sitting on my kitchen counter, growing steadily despite the thin Colorado air. The thing about being underestimated is that it gives you space to observe. While my colleagues were focused on their stock options and ping-pong tournaments, I was learning the architecture of our entire system. Not just the code, though I knew that better than anyone except maybe our CTO. But the legal structures, the patent filings, the contracts with our suppliers and clients. Information is like water. It flows into spaces people forget to guard. My workspace reflected this duality. Surface level, a clean desk with the standard issue laptop, a coffee mug with a motivational quote I'd never actually read, and that pothos in its simple terracotta pot. But in my locked drawer, color-coded folders contained printed copies of every important email, every technical specification, every seemingly insignificant detail that might matter someday. Paranoid? Maybe. But in the tech world, paranoia and prudence are often indistinguishable. The pothos grew slowly but steadily, sending out new leaves every few weeks. I'd trim it carefully, water it precisely, turn it quarter rotations to ensure even growth. My colleagues thought it was quirky, this attention to a plant in an office full of artificial everything. Some found it endearing, the quiet girl from Ohio with her little piece of nature. Others, I could tell, found it pathetic. A desperate attempt to bring life to a sterile environment, to pretend that what we were building here had roots deeper than the next funding round. They had no idea how right they were about the desperation, but wrong about its object. I wasn't trying to humanize the office. I was reminding myself that success isn't about speed, it's about survival. The pothos had outlasted trends, seasons, even owners. It would outlast Nexicor systems too, though I didn't know that yet. What I did know was that every morning when I sat down at my desk, ran my fingers over those green leaves, and opened my laptop to dive into code, I was building something, not just algorithms or products or shareholder value, but knowledge, power. The kind that comes from understanding systems so thoroughly that you can see exactly where they're vulnerable. The pothos was my witness, my constant, my reminder that real growth happens in silence. Victor Hale arrived at Nexicor like a storm system, sudden, destructive, and impossible to ignore. The board brought him in after our previous CEO burned through $8 million in funding with nothing but promises to show for it. Victor was supposed to be our savior, the gray hair who'd guide us to profitability. Gray hair, that's what they called experienced executives in startup land. As if age automatically conferred wisdom instead of just accumulated prejudices. At 45, Victor had the resume they wanted: 2 successful exits, a Harvard MBA, and that particular brand of confidence that came from never having his assumptions challenged. He wore Tom Ford suits to our casual office, his shoes clicking against the polished concrete like a countdown to execution. Within his first week, he'd fired 3 people and reorganized our entire reporting structure. I suddenly found myself reporting to him directly, since he'd decided to personally oversee the technical team until he could hire proper leadership. The tension between us started small. He'd stand behind my desk, reading my screen over my shoulder, his cologne, something expensive and oppressive, making my eyes water. "Interesting approach," he'd say about my code, in a tone that meant the opposite. He had this way of asking questions designed to make you doubt yourself. Are you sure that's the most efficient method? Or, have you considered what someone with more experience might do? But the real problem was how he treated the women in the office. He'd talk over us in meetings, assign our ideas to the nearest male colleague, and pepper his feedback with diminutives. Sweetie, honey, dear, that he'd never use with the men. When our head of marketing, a brilliant woman named Sarah, presented a campaign that would later triple our user acquisition, Victor spent the entire time checking his phone, then asked her male assistant to explain it again, but simpler. The breaking point came during a board meeting in late September. I'd been asked to present our quarterly technical roadmap, a document I'd spent 3 weeks perfecting. The conference room was packed. Board members, potential investors, the entire leadership team. I'd practiced my presentation until I could deliver it in my sleep, prepared for every possible question. I was halfway through explaining our new data processing algorithm when Victor interrupted. "Let's pause here," he said, that fake smile stretching across his face. "Before we continue with these ambitious technical details, can we address the elephant in the room?" The room went silent. I felt my stomach drop. He pointed at my pothos, which I'd moved to the corner of the conference room that morning because my desk was being cleaned. "This," he said, walking over to it, "is what's wrong with our company culture. We're trying to build a cutting-edge technology company, and we have employees who think it's appropriate to decorate our workspace like a suburban kitchen." The investors chuckled nervously. My face burned. "This cheap piece of decor," he continued, actually flicking one of the leaves with his finger, "perfectly represents the kind of small thinking we need to eliminate. It's amateur hour. It's why we're behind schedule. It's why our burn rate is too high. Because we have people who are more concerned with their little hobbies than with building a unicorn." He turned to me. "Claire, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe in radical honesty. This plant, it's a reflection of your contributions here. Small, common, and ultimately replaceable. We need giants, not gardeners." The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Some people looked away. Others, mostly the younger men he'd been grooming, laughed openly. I stood there, my carefully prepared slides still glowing on the screen behind me, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the presenter remote. "Should I continue with the technical roadmap?" I asked, my voice steady despite the humiliation burning through me. I think we've seen enough, Victor said, taking the remote from my hand. I'll handle the rest of the presentation. Why don't you take your plant and give us some space to discuss serious matters? I picked up the pothos, its weight familiar in my hands. As I walked out, I heard him say, "Now, let's talk about what really matters. How we're going to 10x this company." The walk back to my desk felt endless. People averted their eyes as I passed, everyone having heard what happened through the glass walls. I set the pothos back in its usual spot, its leaves somehow still perfect despite being manhandled and mocked. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the plant. My grandmother's words echoed, "Keep something growing." But she'd also told me something else, something I'd forgotten until that moment. "Claire, honey, the thing about plants is they look fragile. But their roots? Their roots can break through concrete if they need to." I opened my laptop and began typing. Not code this time, but a different kind of documentation. Every insult, every stolen idea, every moment of humiliation, dated, detailed, and saved in multiple locations. Victor Hale thought he'd broken me with his public mockery. He had no idea he'd just declared war. The days after the board meeting blurred together like watercolors in rain. I still came to work, still wrote code, still watered my pothos. But something fundamental had shifted. The office felt different, smaller, suffocating, like wearing someone else's clothes. Every laugh from the break room felt directed at me. Every whispered conversation stopped when I approached. Victor, emboldened by his public humiliation of me, became worse. He'd reassigned my major projects to Trevor, a junior developer who'd been with the company 6 months and still needed help with basic Git commands. "I want someone hungry on this," Victor had said, as if my 3 years of 70-hour weeks were evidence of satiation rather than dedication. The project that broke me was called Phoenix, our revolutionary data processing framework that would supposedly rise from the ashes of our current inefficient system. I'd conceived it, architected it, written the foundational code that made it possible. For months, I'd refined the algorithms, tested edge cases, optimized performance until it ran like water through silk. It was my masterpiece, the kind of work that engineers dream of creating once in their careers. Then Victor announced it at the all-hands meeting as Trevor's breakthrough innovation. I sat in the back row, my hands clenched so tight my nails left crescents in my palms. As Trevor stumbled through explaining my work, he couldn't answer basic questions about the implementation because he didn't understand it. But Victor stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, beaming like a proud father. "This is the kind of innovative thinking we need," he proclaimed. "Trevor represents the future of Nexacore." Sarah from marketing found me in the bathroom afterward, crying silently in a stall. "You should file a complaint," she whispered through the door. "What he's doing isn't legal." But we both knew the truth. Victor had been careful. Nothing in writing, nothing overtly discriminatory, just 1,000 small cuts designed to bleed you out slowly. The board loved him. Our runway had extended by 6 months under his leadership, never mind that it was built on my algorithms, Sarah's campaigns, and the contributions of every woman he'd systematically undermined. The disillusionment settled into my bones like winter cold. I started having panic attacks on Sunday nights, my body physically rejecting the thought of another week. My code became mechanical, uninspired, still functional, but lacking the elegance I'd once prided myself on. Even the pothos seemed to sense it, its leaves drooping despite my careful attention. 2 weeks before I quit, Victor called me into his office. "Claire," he said, not looking up from his monitor, "I'm concerned about your performance." "My performance?" I kept my voice neutral, professional. "You seem disengaged, unmotivated." He finally looked at me, his eyes cold. "I need people who are all in, who bleed Nexacore blue." I wanted to scream that I'd bled every color for this company, that my code was the backbone everything else hung on. that his golden boy Trevor couldn't debug his way out of a paper bag without my help. Instead, I said, "I understand. Do you?" He leaned back in his $8,000 ergonomic chair. "Because I'm not sure you do. This is a rocket ship, Claire, and there's limited space. We need eagles, not pigeons, leaders, not followers. I'm going to be very direct with you. I don't see a future for you here beyond maybe another quarter. You might want to start exploring other opportunities." The words should have devastated me. Instead, they freed me. I felt something cold and clear crystallize in my chest, like ice forming on a window. "Thank you for your honesty," I said. He seemed surprised by my calm. "That's it? No questions? No pushback?" Would it matter if I did? For the first time since I'd known him, Victor looked uncertain. Then his face hardened again. "No," he said. "It wouldn't." I submitted my resignation the next day, 2 weeks' notice, professional to the end. Victor barely glanced at it. "Probably for the best," he said. "You were never really Nexacore material anyway." My last day was a Friday in October. The office was half empty, everyone else already mentally on their weekend. I packed my few personal items into a small box, some books, a coffee mug, the folder of printed documents from my locked drawer that I slipped between the books. The pothos sat on my desk, too large now for the box. Trevor stopped by, awkward and guilty. "Hey, Claire, I just wanted to say, good luck with everything." "Trevor," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "when the Phoenix framework crashes, and it will, probably during peak load, the issue will be in the memory allocation module, lines 847 through 923. You'll want to refactor the entire garbage collection process." His face went pale. "Wait, what? Can you show me?" "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said, picking up my pothos. "After all, it's your breakthrough innovation." I walked out of Nexacore Systems at 4:47 p.m., the Denver skyline crisp against the October sky. The pothos was heavy in my arms, but I didn't mind the weight. As I waited for the elevator, I looked back through the glass doors one last time. Victor was in the conference room, gesticulating wildly at some presentation, probably selling dreams built on foundations he didn't understand. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd driven out the weak link, the small-town girl who didn't belong in his world of unicorns and rocket ships. But Victor Hale had made a crucial error, the kind that arrogant men often make. He'd assumed that silence meant surrender, that walking away meant giving up. He'd never considered that sometimes retreat is just preparation for a different kind of battle. The apartment I rented in Capitol Hill was smaller than my old place, just 500 square feet with windows that faced a brick wall. But it was mine. Paid for with the severance package I'd negotiated, 2 months plus unused PTO, and the freelance contracts I'd started picking up. The pothos sat on a makeshift desk I'd assembled from IKEA parts, its leaves catching what little light filtered through the narrow windows. For the first week after leaving Nexacore, I did nothing but sleep and read. Not technical manuals or programming guides, but law journals, patent filings, intellectual property case studies. I'd download them at the public library, printing the important ones on their ancient printer that charged 10 cents a page. My bedroom wall became a maze of highlighted passages, connected with colored string like something out of a detective movie. The more I read, the more I understood. The tech world wasn't built on innovation. It was built on ownership. Who held the patents? Who controlled the licenses? Who could prove they'd created something first? Code was poetry, but legal documentation was power. I enrolled in an online course from Stanford, Intellectual Property in the Digital Age. Then another from MIT, Patent Law for Engineers. I studied at night, the pothos my only companion, working through case studies of David versus Goliath battles where the Davids won not through strength but through better documentation. During the days, I coded, not for clients, that was just to pay rent, but for myself. I was rebuilding the Phoenix framework from scratch, but better. Every function, every module, every line meticulously documented and timestamped. I used version control religiously, creating a paper trail that would hold up in court. But more importantly, I was improving it, adding features that the original framework couldn't dream of supporting. The loneliness was crushing at first. I'd catch myself reaching for Slack, wanting to share a breakthrough with colleagues who no longer existed in my world. Sarah from marketing texted once to check in, but I knew she couldn't afford to maintain contact. Victor had made it clear that fraternizing with former employees was career suicide. So I adapted. The coffee shop on Colfax became my office. The barista, a philosophy dropout named Marcus, became used to me claiming the corner table from open to close, surrounded by legal texts and laptop screens full of code. "You're either planning to rob a bank or sue someone," he said one day, refilling my fourth Americano. "The second one," I replied, and he laughed like it was a joke. The breakthrough came in month 3, while researching Nexicor's patents. I discovered something Victor's arrogance had blinded him to. The core algorithm that Phoenix was built on, the one I'd originally developed, was based on a research paper from 2019. The paper was open source, published under Creative Commons, but Nexicor had never properly attributed it or followed the licensing requirements. Technically, their entire implementation was built on legally shaky ground. But here's where it got interesting. The original paper had a provision. Anyone who created a substantially improved derivative work could file for independent patent protection. And my new version, it was 60% faster, used half the memory, and included revolutionary features like adaptive learning and self-optimization. It wasn't just substantially improved, it was a complete evolution. I spent 2 weeks preparing the patent application. Every claim carefully worded, every technical detail precise enough to be irrefutable, but broad enough to be valuable. The lawyer I consulted, a friend of a friend who specialized in tech IP, read through it and whistled low. "This is either brilliant or insane," she said. "If this is as foundational as you claim, and if Nexicor really is using the unattributed original." "They are," I said, sliding across the printed evidence I'd collected during my last months at the company. Emails where Victor dismissed the need for academic citations, development logs showing the original implementation, even a recorded Zoom call where Trevor admitted he didn't understand the underlying mathematics that came directly from that 2019 paper. The lawyer's eyes widened. "This could work, but you know they'll come after you. Victor Hale doesn't seem like the type to take this quietly." I thought about the humiliation in that conference room, the project stolen and renamed, the systematic destruction of my confidence disguised as radical honesty. Then I looked at the pothos, which had sprouted 2 new leaves since I'd brought it home. "Let him come," I said. The patent application was filed on a Thursday in January. I celebrated alone with Chinese takeout and a glass of wine that cost more than I should have spent. The pothos relocated temporarily to the kitchen counter so I could see it while I ate. The plant had grown so much it needed a new pot, its roots beginning to peek through the drainage holes, still contained, but not for much longer. That night, I opened a new document and began writing a business plan. Not for a company, not yet, but for what came next. Because getting the patent was just the first step. The real revenge would be in what I did with it. I made a list of every company that competed with Nexicor, every potential partner they'd alienated with Victor's aggressive tactics, every engineer who'd left under his leadership. The list was longer than I'd expected. Victor had made enemies the way other people made coffee, habitually and without thinking about the consequences. As I typed, snow began to fall outside my narrow window, covering Denver in white. The pothos seemed to glow in the lamplight, a spot of green in my monochrome apartment. My grandmother had been right about keeping something growing, but she'd been right about the roots too. Mine were about to break through concrete. The patent approval came through in March, faster than expected. I stared at the official document on my laptop screen. The USPTO seal, crisp and authoritative. Patent granted, adaptive data processing framework with self-optimizing architecture. Inventor, Claire Matthews. No mention of Nexacore, no trace of Victor Hale's influence. This was mine, clean and legal. But owning the patent was only half the equation. I needed to understand exactly how vulnerable Nexacore's position was. This required detective work that would have been impossible if I hadn't spent 3 years learning their systems from the inside out. I started with public records. Every tech company leaves traces: SEC filings, conference presentations, GitHub repositories that developers forget to make private. Nexacore was especially sloppy, their rapid growth leaving gaps in their operational security. I found presentation decks on SlideShare where Trevor, in his eagerness to build his reputation, had detailed the Phoenix Framework's architecture. Every slide was more evidence that they were using the unattributed algorithm. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source. A recruiter reached out about a position at a competing firm, and during our conversation, she mentioned that Nexacore was desperately trying to hire senior engineers. They lost 3 more last month, she confided. Apparently, there's some issue with their core technology that no one can fix. I knew exactly what issue they were facing. The Phoenix Framework, without my continued maintenance, was hitting the exact bottlenecks I'd warned Trevor about. But more importantly, without understanding the mathematical foundations, the ones from that 2019 paper, they couldn't optimize it properly. Late nights in my apartment became research sessions that bordered on obsession. I mapped out Nexacore's entire technical infrastructure, using publicly available information and the knowledge I'd accumulated during my time there. The Pothos watched from its new, larger pot as I covered my walls with diagrams, legal precedents, and timeline charts. The key revelation came while reviewing their latest investor presentation, which someone had helpfully leaked to TechCrunch. Victor was promising a revolutionary upgrade to their data processing capabilities, scheduled for Q3. He was essentially selling my improved framework, the one I'd now patented, before it existed. They were promising something they couldn't deliver without violating my patent. I consulted with Patricia Wong, an IP lawyer who'd made her reputation taking down tech giants. She reviewed my evidence over expensive coffee in her downtown office, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. The original research paper is the key, she said finally. Nexacore built their entire system on unattributed open-source work. But here's the beautiful part. The license for that paper requires attribution and share alike. They violated both. Meanwhile, you've created a derivative work that's properly attributed and significantly improved. Your patent is rock solid. So what's my next move? Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that probably terrified opposing counsel. We send them a cease and desist letter. But first, we need leverage. Who are their biggest clients? I pulled out my phone and showed her the list I'd compiled. 3. Fortune 500 companies that depended on Nexacore's platform for critical operations. All of them had alternatives they could switch to, if given a good enough reason. And their competitors? Another list. 5 companies who would love to license my improved framework, especially if it meant gaining an advantage over Nexacore. You've done your homework, Patricia said, impressed. But there's one more thing we need. Proof that they know about your patent and are planning to infringe anyway. This was the tricky part. I needed someone on the inside, but reaching out to current employees would be risky. Then I remembered Daniel, a senior engineer who'd left Nexacore a month after I did. He'd added me on LinkedIn with a message. They did the same thing to me: stolen work, public humiliation. Let me know if you ever want to compare notes. I met Daniel at a bar in Lodo, the kind of place tech workers went to complain about their jobs. He looked tired, older than his 35 years, with the hollow eyes of someone who'd been through the Nexacore grinder. They're panicking, he said after his second beer. Victor keeps promising the board that Phoenix 2.0 will revolutionize everything, but Trevor can't even get the current version stable. They've brought in consultants, outsourced to a dev shop in Eastern Europe, even tried to poach engineers from Google. Nothing's working. Do they know about my patent? Daniel laughed bitterly. Oh, they know. Victor had a meltdown when the legal team told him, threw a coffee mug at the wall. but he's convinced they can engineer around it, create something sufficiently different to avoid infringement. Can they? Not without understanding the underlying math. And the only person who understood that. He raised his glass to me. Well, she's sitting across from me, isn't she? I bought the next round, and Daniel shared more details. Internal emails discussing my patent, screenshots he'd saved for insurance, recordings of meetings where Victor dismissed the legal risks, even a development roadmap that explicitly referenced my published improvements as features to replicate. Why are you helping me? I asked. Because Victor destroyed my career too. Because he takes credit for other people's work and throws them away when they're no longer useful. Because someone needs to stop him. He paused. And honestly, because I want to watch him fall. That night, I went home with a folder of evidence that would make any IP lawyer salivate. The pothos had grown new aerial roots, reaching out into empty space, searching for something to grab onto. I knew the feeling, but unlike the plant, I'd found my target. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Patricia. Subject line, "We have everything we need." The war was about to begin. The strategy was surgical. No dramatic confrontations, no public declarations of war, just a series of precise moves designed to isolate Nexacore from every direction. Patricia called it death by 1,000 contracts. First, I incorporated Prometheus Data Systems, LLC. The name was deliberate. I was bringing fire to those who thought they owned the mountain. The business address was a shared workspace in Rhino, but most of my meetings happened in Patricia's conference room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Denver Tech Center. We started with Nexacore's competitors. I reached out to Dataflow, a company Victor had publicly insulted at a conference last year, calling their CEO a dinosaur trying to play in Silicon Valley. Their response to my licensing proposal was enthusiastic. Within 2 weeks, we had a signed agreement. They would license my patented framework for their next-generation platform, with an exclusivity clause for their market segment. Next was Quantum Analytics, a startup that had lost 3 major contracts to Nexacore's aggressive pricing. Their CTO flew in from Austin just to review my technical documentation. "This is exactly what we need," she said, running her fingers through the performance benchmarks. "And the fact that it'll put pressure on Victor, that's just a bonus." The masterstroke was approaching Nexacore's biggest client, Meridian Financial. I didn't go to them directly, that would have been too obvious. Instead, I made sure their chief technology officer accidentally received a white paper I'd written about data processing vulnerabilities in financial systems. The paper didn't mention Nexacore by name, but the technical specifications I described matched their Phoenix framework exactly. Meridian's legal team contacted Patricia within 48 hours. While the legal machinery turned, I focused on building relationships. The tech community in Denver was smaller than people realized, and Victor had burned bridges with his arrogance. I attended meetups, gave talks about ethical innovation, published open-source tools that demonstrated my framework's capabilities without revealing the proprietary elements. At a Women in Tech panel, I met Jennifer Huang, a venture capitalist who'd had her own run-in with Victor when he'd dismissed her firm as not serious enough for Nexacore. "I heard you have something interesting in development," she said over coffee afterward. "I have a patent that could fundamentally change how data processing works," I replied. "And a list of companies ready to license it." "Including Nexacore?" "Especially not Nexacore," she smiled. "Tell me more." The meeting with Jennifer led to introductions to other investors, other founders, other engineers who'd been steamrolled by Victor's management style. Each conversation was a thread in the web I was weaving, each connection another wall closing in around Nexacore. The pressure started showing. Daniel, still in touch with friends inside the company, reported that Victor had hired 3 separate law firms to find a way around my patent. They were burning through cash, trying to reverse engineer a solution that had taken me months to perfect, with full knowledge of the underlying principles. Then came the email I'd been expecting. Victor himself, from his personal Gmail account rather than his Nexacore address. "Claire, I think we should talk. There might have been some misunderstandings about your departure. Perhaps we could discuss a consulting arrangement. I forwarded it to Patricia with a single word. No. But Victor wasn't done. He showed up at the coffee shop on Colfax where I worked, sliding into the seat across from me without invitation. He looked older, grayer. The Tom Ford suit replaced with startup casual that didn't quite fit his frame. You're making a mistake, he said without preamble. This vendetta isn't good for anyone. This isn't a vendetta, I replied, closing my laptop slowly. This is business. You think you've won something? You think destroying Nexicor will make you feel better about being a mediocre engineer who couldn't cut it? The old me would have flinched. The me who'd cried in the bathroom stall, who'd had panic attacks on Sunday nights. But that person had been refined by fire into something harder. Victor, I said calmly, I don't need to destroy Nexicor. You're doing that yourself. I'm just providing alternatives to companies who want stable, legally sound technology. His face reddened. That patent is based on work you did at Nexicor. We'll prove it in court. Go ahead. I have 3 years of documentation showing every line of code I wrote, every algorithm I developed, every contribution I made that you gave to Trevor or took credit for yourself. Plus, I smiled. I have recordings of you specifically stating that my contributions were, what was the word? Worthless? He stood abruptly, knocking over my coffee. The brown liquid spread across the table, dripping onto the floor. Marcus the barista started toward us, but I waved him off. This isn't over, Victor said. No. I agreed, pulling napkins from the dispenser to clean up his mess. It's just beginning. That night, I repotted the pothos again. It had grown so much it needed a planter 3 times the size of the original. As I worked the soil around its roots, I thought about growth, about patience, about the long game that Victor never knew I was playing. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. Meridian just announced they're reviewing their data processing vendor. 3 more companies following suit. Victor's about to have a very bad quarter. I smiled, washing the soil from my hands. The pothos looked magnificent in its new pot, leaves spreading wide, roots firmly established. It had taken time, taken patience, taken careful cultivation, just like revenge. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in April. I wasn't there, of course. But Daniel's friend Emma, who still worked as an executive assistant at Nexicor, recorded the whole thing on her phone. She sent me the audio that evening, and I listened to it while watering the pothos. Victor's panicked voice filling my small apartment. This is a coordinated attack, Victor was saying, his usual commanding tone cracked with desperation. Claire Matthews has somehow convinced half our client base that our technology is legally compromised. Is it? Asked a board member, Richard Steinberg. If I recognize the voice correctly, our legal team seems to think she has a valid claim. We can engineer around her patent. We just need more time and resources. Resources we don't have, another voice interjected. We've burned through $2 million in legal fees alone. Meridian pulled out yesterday. Quantum Analytics just announced they're using Prometheus Data Systems Framework, Claire's company. Our stock valuation has dropped 40% in 3 weeks. The recording captured shuffling papers, uncomfortable silence. Then Steinberg again. Victor, you assured us that the Phoenix framework was proprietary technology developed in-house. It was. She developed it while employed by Nexicor. But based on unattributed open-source research, according to our lawyers, and the improvements she's patented were created after her departure. We're exposed on multiple fronts. I fast-forwarded through 20 minutes of technical discussion until I heard my name again. What does she want? A female board member asked. Has anyone actually talked to Matthews? I tried, Victor said. She's not interested in negotiation. She wants to destroy us. Or, Steinberg said slowly, she wants justice. Victor, I've reviewed her personnel file. Consistent, excellent reviews until you arrived. Then suddenly she's labeled as underperforming. And this incident with the plant in the board meeting, Multiple witnesses have confirmed your behavior was inappropriate. It was a metaphor for, it was workplace harassment, and now it's going to cost us everything. The crucial moment came an hour into the meeting. The board called for a vote of no confidence in Victor's leadership. The vote was unanimous, but I wasn't satisfied with just Victor's removal. The real showdown came 3 days later at the Denver Tech Summit, where Nexacore was supposed to announce Phoenix 2.0. Instead, they sent Trevor, promoted to interim CTO, to do damage control. I was in the audience, front row, my presence impossible to ignore. Trevor looked physically ill when he saw me. His hands shook as he clicked through slides explaining their pivot to alternative technologies. During the Q&A, I stood up. The room went silent. Everyone in Denver Tech knew who I was by now. "Trevor," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the conference hall. "Can you explain to the audience how Nexacore plans to maintain its service-level agreements without the Phoenix framework?" He stammered, looked to the wings where Victor was supposedly banned but stood watching anyway. "We have contingency plans." Interesting. Because according to my analysis, without Phoenix, your processing capacity drops by 60%. That means breaking contracts with every major client. Unless, I paused, letting the moment build. You license the technology from someone who actually understands it. The audience murmured, someone was definitely recording this. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm simply stating that Prometheus Data Systems has a stable, legally sound framework available for licensing. To everyone except Nexacore. Victor burst onto the stage then, his face purple with rage. "You can't do this. You developed that technology using our resources, our time." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and showing an email timestamp. "I developed the patented improvements at 2:47 a.m. on November 15th, 3 weeks after you terminated my employment. From my apartment, using my own equipment, I have the Git commits to prove it." Security moved toward Victor, but he wasn't done. "You're nothing without Nexacore, a nobody from nowhere who thought a potted plant made her special." The entire conference hall held its breath. This was it, the moment I'd visualized during all those late nights, all those hours of planning. "You're right about one thing," I said, standing straighter. "I did think that plant was special. It reminded me that real growth doesn't happen overnight. It takes patience, care, and deep roots. You wouldn't understand that. Victor, you're all surface, no substance. You take credit for other people's work because you can't create anything yourself. You mistake fear for respect, volume for authority." I looked around the room, making eye contact with the founders, engineers, and investors who'd all suffered under Victor's reign in various ways. "But here's what you never understood about that cheap piece of decor," I continued. "It wasn't just surviving in your sterile environment, it was thriving, growing stronger, developing roots that would eventually break through whatever tried to contain them." I turned back to Trevor. "My licensing offer stands, for everyone except Nexacore. Though I hear Dataflow is hiring, if you're looking for stable employment." The walk off that stage was the longest and shortest of my life. Behind me, Victor was screaming about lawsuits, about revenge, about destruction. But his voice was already fading, becoming irrelevant. Patricia met me in the lobby, a champagne bottle in her hand. "The board just announced Victor's immediate termination for cause. No severance. They're also investigating him for potential fraud regarding misrepresentation of proprietary technology." That evening, I sat in my apartment with the pothos, now so large it commanded the entire corner of my living room. Emma had sent another recording, the emergency investor call where Nexacore announced they were exploring acquisition offers, their valuation destroyed, their future uncertain. Victor Hale was finished in tech. Word was he'd moved back to Connecticut, possibly to work for his father-in-law's insurance company, the kind of small, mundane fate he'd always feared more than failure. The plant's leaves rustled in the breeze from the open window. Tomorrow, I had meetings with 3 more companies interested in licensing my technology. Next week, Jennifer Huang wanted to discuss a Series A round for Prometheus Data Systems. But tonight, I just sat with my grandmother's plant, appreciating how far we'd both come from that humiliating moment in the conference room. Victor had been wrong about so many things, but especially about one. He'd called my contribution worthless. As it turned out, it was worth everything. 6 months later, Nexacore was acquired by Dataflow for a fraction of its former valuation, what the tech blogs called a fire sale acquisition. I read about it on my phone while sitting in my new office, a real one this time, with windows overlooking the mountains. Prometheus Data Systems had grown to 12 employees, carefully chosen engineers who understood that innovation meant more than just moving fast and breaking things. The Pothos had made the move with me, of course. It now lived in a custom planter by the window, its vines trailing down in elegant cascades. New employees always asked about it, and I'd tell them a shortened version of the story, enough to explain why respect and attribution mattered in our company culture, not enough to seem like I was dwelling on the past. I was reviewing code when Sarah from Nexacore, former Nexacore, walked into my office. She'd reached out a week earlier, asking if we could talk. I wanted to apologize, she said, sitting across from my desk, for not standing up for you when it mattered. You had your own survival to think about, I replied. Still, what Victor did was wrong. What we all let him do was wrong. She paused. I heard Trevor's working at a small agency now, doing basic web development. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. Trevor had been a tool, nothing more. What about you? I'm starting my own marketing firm. Actually, that's partly why I'm here. I wanted you to know that Victor tried to start a new company last month, tried to raise funding for an AI startup. And Jennifer Huang's firm led the rejection. Apparently, word spread about his history of claiming credit for others' work. No reputable investor will touch him. Sarah smiled slightly. He's working for his father-in-law now, selling insurance in Hartford. That evening, I stayed late in the office, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The code I was reviewing was elegant, submitted by a junior developer who reminded me of myself 3 years ago, eager, talented, undervalued by her previous employer. I made sure to add detailed comments praising her innovative approach, CCing the entire team. My phone buzzed with a LinkedIn notification. Victor had viewed my profile. No message, no connection request. Just that small digital footprint that told me he was watching my success from his exile in Connecticut. I didn't block him. Let him see what he'd thrown away. Patricia stopped by on her way out. Did you see the Wall Street Journal article? They're calling your patent case the David and Goliath story of tech. You're getting speaking requests from every conference in the country. I saw, I said. I'm turning most of them down. I've got a company to build. She laughed. The best revenge really is success, isn't it? No, I said, looking at the Pothos, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The best revenge is becoming someone who doesn't need revenge anymore. Later that night, in my new apartment, a 2-bedroom with actual sunlight and a small balcony, I sat with a glass of wine, looking out at the Denver skyline. The Pothos had spawned several offspring, smaller plants I'd propagated and given to my new employees. Each one came with a small card. Grow deep roots, take your time, break through when ready. My laptop chimed with an email. Another company wanting to license my framework. Another step toward building something that would outlast any individual slight or victory. I'd won. But more importantly, I'd moved on. I thought about Victor, probably lying awake in his Connecticut bedroom, replaying his mistakes, wondering how a quiet engineer with a cheap plant had orchestrated his downfall. He'd never understand that it wasn't about him. Not really. It was about me refusing to let him define my worth. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, as always. The Pothos caught the morning sun, its leaves almost glowing. A new employee, fresh from a toxic startup environment, stopped to admire it. It's beautiful, she said. How do you keep it so healthy? Patience, I said. Good soil. And never underestimate the power of strong roots. She nodded, not fully understanding yet. But she would. In this industry, we all learned eventually that the flashiest growth often had the weakest foundations, while the quiet, steady progress, the kind that looked like nothing special from the outside, that was what truly lasted. I opened my laptop and got to work. There were algorithms to optimize, partnerships to negotiate, a company to grow. The pothos rustled gently in the air conditioning, a quiet reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. Victor Hale had thought he was teaching me a lesson about power when he'd humiliated me in that conference room. He had taught me something, just not what he'd intended. He'd taught me that power wasn't about loud voices or expensive suits, or the ability to make others feel small. Real power was in creation, in ownership, in the patient cultivation of something lasting. Real power was in knowing your own worth, regardless of who tried to diminish it. Real power was a pothos plant that had outlived an entire company's arrogance, and real power was walking away from that victory not with bitterness, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd won by becoming exactly who they were meant to be. Thank you so much for listening to this story of revenge, resilience, and redemption. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. Whether you're in your car during a commute, relaxing at home, or maybe even at your own office desk with your own plant nearby. I want to hear from you. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Claire's journey. Have you ever faced a similar situation? How did you handle your own office injustice? Let's discuss in the comments below.